So in this class we're going to be continuing with how to use JavaScript with the HTML and CSS knowledge that we've already acquired, and we will be looking at the DOM object and how to manipulate the DOM object, the DOM tree, some JavaScript events, and a lot of exercises to get us working with HTML element and JavaScript. So what is the DOM? The DOM is referred to as a document object model, and this is the document that is rendered when we load up any website page on our browser. So the DOM is made up of a tree of HTML elements, and in these HTML elements it has elements and properties that we can change, edit, remove, etc. using JavaScript. We can also put events on these elements, and we can do this through the help of the document object model. So first of all, we have this window object, which is literally the window in which our website is rendered. Then inside that window object we have the document. So remember when I said that to declare or to start an HTML document, you have that doc type HTML. This is that document. And then underneath that we have the HTML elements, and inside that HTML elements is then divided into head, where we have the children element, and then body, which is a sibling to head, and that has its own children, and the div, for example, has different children as well. And that's how the tree continues to grow until we reach the end of the document file. So the relationship between each of these elements in the DOM tree is after the HTML element, where we have the body that renders the content we see on our pages. Each HTML element, or the root HTML, this HTML element here, we can refer to as the root element, and the body element has the HTML element as its parent. These two elements here has the body as its parent, and both of them are siblings. And then underneath each element you have the children. So these are children to body, body is a child to HTML, and the relationship between these two are siblings. So that is just how, just giving you an idea of how the relationship between each element in the DOM tree is. So the entire document is a document node, and every element in the document is an element node. So the body is a node, the div is a node, and even comments which are not rendered in the DOM tree is also a node. And then they all have relationship between each other, which I just mentioned before. So the way we kind of describe this relationship is having a parent, child, and sibling, etc. And so for this example, where we have the body has the first and last child because it doesn't have any other child. If there was another child, there would be a second, and then if there was just like 3 children, the third child would be the last child. And then this div then has its own children, which is first and last child. And so if you wanted to access each child, you can see that it's done this by calling the parent element and then .children. And then since it's this div, when we're able to traverse the DOM and get all the children of this div, we can access it as an array. And when we looked at array earlier, we know that to get the value of an array, we put in the square brackets and then the index of that value in the array, which is what we're doing here. So we've seen to get the first child is index 0, second child index 1, and the last child index 2 there. Okay. So now let's look at some examples of how we can use JavaScript to manipulate our HTML elements. So in our other previous classes, we've managed to build this one-page static website. And so our exercise here is asking us to, we should select in the inner text should say something about yourself. So here we're meant to create a paragraph. We're meant to select a paragraph and then change the inner text to something about ourselves. So now let's see which paragraphs we have here. and we have this paragraph, this first paragraph that says learning JavaScript, and it has an ID of p elements. So how do we then change what's inside the content? Remember, we have the starting tag and the closing tag, in between we have the content. So we're trying to change the content. So we do this by saying const, so we declare a variable, we call it pl, you can name this whatever you want, and you say document dot get elements by id, and then I think the id that we had there was p element. So in order to select an element that we want to change inside our HTML, we can do this using that function called document.getElements by ID, and then passing in the name of the ID that we just called. So you can name your you can add the attribute ID and give it any name you want, and in this case I've named it p element. And so since I've named it that, in order to change it, and I've stored it inside there, I can then say to change this, I can do pel.inner HTML and then say something like, I want to learn more JavaScript. And now you can see that has changed from the initial content was learning JavaScript, which is the first one, and now we have I want to learn JavaScript, which it has changed to be like this now. Other things that we can do as well, it says here that we should change the font style, the font size of our paragraph. So we can also style things using JavaScript, but it is advisable that you do most of your styling with CSS, but you can also do this with JavaScript. So in order to change the font size, we select that element again and we'll say pel.style, and then we say font size, and then we can give it the font size of 30 pixels. And you can see that is huge. Also, we can select an attribute of an element. So for example, one attribute, we said that attributes are other properties that are used to describe an element. And so let's look for an example of an attribute here. So we can see this image has an attribute of source, alt, and also ID. So let us select it to change the picture that we have here. So in order to do that, what we can do now is come here and then select that image. So if we say const image and we say document, remember to select an element, to select one element, we can do it this way, select document by ID, and I think the ID there was pick. And so since we've selected that image and we want to change the source attribute, we can say image.src, which is source attributes, equals to, before we had it as assets and then what it was, and now instead of that we can change it to something else. Now let's change it to the second picture that we have here, which is let's take all of this out, 316.1639.12, and now you can see that that's a completely new image that we've just set now. So we've looked at how we can change the inner HTML of a paragraph, we can change the style, and we can also manipulate the attributes. That's all good and fine. And these are just like other examples that you can do as well. So here it says to change the font family. I think that's still a style as well. So if you say pel.style and .font family here, I would say we want to give it a font family of sans serif, for example. And you see that has changed to a different type of font. We also have an example of changing the width, the border. So the width will just be the same thing, and then you give it the value of 100 pixels. Same as the style for the border, where we can just simply say pel dot, I think we're trying to get the border. So instead, because that's not on this, that's on the style as well, we can say style dot border and equals to 1 pixels. Let's put that in a 1 pixels solid gray, for example, and you can see that now this now has a border within it. So you can do a lot of things like that if you want, using the style or the attributes or the inner HTML. Moving forward, I think we have another exercise of selecting a single element in a page, which we've just done. Now, how do we select multiple elements? If you've got multiple elements that you want to select, how do you do this? This is what we're going to be trying to explain. So we're trying to select either one element or multiple elements. And so how do we do this? So we've seen that by selecting one element, we can use get element by ID. We can also use something called get element by class name. So for example, if we just wanted to select one element, so let's just pick this side element here, and we say side, and then we go and say document dot get element by class name, and then we pass in the class name side, and then if we console.log that, console.log, we should get it has an object collection, which is the type of array. If we then do that, you can see that we've selected the div element that was here. So that would always return that type, and it behaves like an array. And so that's why I was able to use an index to be able to get the value that I wanted inside this side. Also, we can get element by tag name. So if I change that, this is just for single element, and I change that to a div as well. You can see that the first div that I got here is the container, which is the first div element that you can find in our body, which is this one. So it only selects one element. But for example, if we wanted to select multiple elements, so if you see this where we have multiple elements as well, we can also do this. But before we talk about that, we also have a type of selector called query selector, which can be used to select one element, and I think is probably the most popular way after get element by ID to select something. So we can use this to select both class names, tags, IDs, etc. But then in this case, we're only going to be selecting one thing. So in order to use this query selector, and let's say we're selecting a class, we do this by, so here this is a class. If we want to select this p class here, inside the script we say dot, we have to put it dot demo because that's a class. And you can see that when we, and that's not an array anymore because we're just like selecting one object. And so you can see that we got that first p tag that was here, which is this one. If we want to select this one, which is the ID, we can do this by saying hash p element, and then that element that we want. So you can see that it's literally selected the whole thing. So with the p element, the style, everything that we added to it as well. So these style that you're seeing here are the styles that we've added in our JavaScript in our script here before. So all of this is what is showing here, and we selected it. We're console logging it here. This is why it shows all of those things. Also, we can also use the query selector to select just one element, so the div that we selected before, and we just get that one div. So this query selector can select either a class name, an ID, or a tag or an element if you want. So if we want to select multiple elements, and we've seen that our multiple elements is this element called, these elements that have the same class name called demo. So in order to do that, we've said query selector all instead of just one single query selector, and that has given us something called an object node list, which as well behaves like an array. So if we wanted to print everything out, if we wanted to log, so we wanted to dynamically log all the contents that is inside this paragraph, how can we do that? So if you remember from when we were looking at for loops, let's just take all of this out, or maybe we can leave them in if we want. So in order to do this, we can use a for loop, and how we use a for loop is by doing for, the keyword for. We can say let I equals to 0, and then I less than side, which is the variable, dot length. So we can call length because that behaves like an array. And then we can then say I plus plus, which increases I by 1. Either you do it that way or say I equals to I plus 1. And then you then say that we want to console.log, we want console log side at each index. We want to, so now it's giving us everything at each index, but we want the text, we want the content. So we'll say inner HTML, and so that now give us learning HTML, learning CSS, and learning JavaScript, right? So now we're able to do that way and dynamically print out each of our elements that are inside this these paragraph tags back to us, which is like a very nice way to use JavaScript to go through elements in our page. Okay, so what else is there to look at? So when we talk about traversing the DOM, that is just using the query selectors which we've used, and then using that to then print out the text in our console, which we have just done. So next we're going to be looking at how to create, append, replace, and remove elements, then remove them. So how do we do this? So in order to create an element, what we would have to do is, let's put it in a constant variable and say new element, and then we say document dot create element. So these are all functions that are pre-built in JavaScript. Document.create elements, and then we want to create a p element. And so for that p element, sorry, that's meant to be inside brackets, so p elements like that. And so for that p element, we then want to put in a text in that p element. We don't want our p element to just be empty. So in order to do that, let's create a text. So if we say constant new text equals to document dot create text node, and we then say this is the new text. And so we can then put that text inside our p element by doing something called doing something called appending, which is the second thing that we can do with JavaScript. We can append nodes or elements inside other elements. So now we're appending a node inside this element, and then we can do this by saying new element dot append child, and then we say new text. But now we're obviously not seeing this new, we're obviously not seeing the text that we just added the paragraph that we just added our text in. So how do we do this? In order to show this here, we can say that, okay, let's append this inside, let's see how we can do this. Maybe if we create another div here, or I think this is inside, okay, that doesn't have any other div. So let's create another div here, or yeah, we create another div here. So div, and then say div, and then we can say ID. So just so that we can select the ID to append our paragraph inside. and we say create p, and then inside here we then use a constant and we say div append text or div append paragraph, which is p, and we then say document dot query selector. So remember, we can use either get document.id or query selector. So in this time, let's just use query selector to see that that's what works as well. And then the ID that we want to select is, what's the ID name that we gave it? Create p. So we say we want to give this create p. And so in this case, since we have what we have now, we can then say div append p dot append child new element, which is this new element that we've just given it now. So if we go down, you can see that we now have our text called this is the new text. So we've been able to successfully do this and keep it there. So now we've looked at how to create an element, how to append an element. So how do we then replace and remove an element? How do we do this? So let's create another element, and then that element that we create is going to be appended, is going to be replaced by the first elements that we appended. So how do we do this? So these are our this first element that we just have. Before going further, let me put a border around this div so we can all see what we're working with. In order to do that, I can just say, I think this was create p here, which we have. I think this already has the same thing, so I can just like a comma dot create p. I think it was an ID, so I can use a hash there instead, and you can see that that now has 1 pixel's solid gray border around that, which is what we want. Okay, so now that we've separated what we're working with now, let's go and make our new elements that we want to replace. So we call this constant replace text, and then we say document dot create element, and we can create any element we want, but in this case we want to create a p element again because that's what we want to replace. You can replace it with an lr element, it doesn't necessarily matter. And then once we've done that, we can then append it directly inside. So instead of doing this new text, what we can just do is replace text dot append child. And so you know here where we put this inside this variable, so instead of doing that, what we're just doing is taking all of this and putting it inside here, which is another way that you can do this if you don't want to create a variable. And so here we can just say replacement text, just so you know the difference. Replacement text. And now that we have our replacement text, then we can then decide how we want to replace this. And before then, here where we have this p elements that we had, we can give it an ID. So this new element dot ID, we can say the new element ID is p. You can just give it whatever we want, so let's just call it RPL. And then since that has an ID, in order to replace this text with this new text, now that I have this, I think I've written something wrong, so it's just here. In order to replace this text with this one, we have to find out the parent that we want to do the switching. So in order to find out the parent, we have to say new element, or we give it like a constant, and then we say parent div, and we're like parent div new element dot parent node, which then gives us the parent div. And so with that, we can then say parent div dot replace child, and then we're replacing the new element, which is this replacement text, or replace text, with the old one, which was new element. And so in that case, we then have replacement text here. If we take this out, you can see that nothing, we still have this is a new text, but because we wanted to replace it, and we put that there, that has changed to replacement text. What if we wanted to remove it? So to remove this, we can just, since we've got our parent div, we can say parent div dot remove child, and then we can say replace text, and you can see that that's completely gone. It's empty because there are no texts available anymore. So that is just how you do your create element, append element, replace element, or remove child inside a parent div element, or inside any other parent element. So we've successfully been able to look at some of the things that we can do with JavaScript and the HTML elements. And now in this time, we're going to be looking at DOM events and DOM listeners, and some of the types of events like mouse events and keyboard events, and we have some exercises. And then I'll show you the resources and also introduce you to the project of this course. And hopefully by the time you all have watched the videos, gone over it more than one time, you'll be able to confidently build a one-page website. So JavaScript events kind of work like this. So when we put an event on an element, we're really saying that when something happens on our page, for example, when a page load happens, we want a video to play, for example. When we click a button, we want another event to happen. When we release the mouse, we want something else to happen. When we delete something, we want something else to happen. So these in general is just how events works. Once our user does something on the page, we want to be able to react to that interaction on the page with something else using our code. So there's this simple exercise that says we should add a click event to our button, and then see what that does. So in order to do this, let us go back to play code and see how that looks. We want to add a click event to this P element, and once we click on this P element here, we want the color to change to red. So how do we do that? First, we've selected our P element, which is this first one here. We've selected that already. So the ID was P element here. So let's go and see if I've selected that before. So this is this first one here. So how do we then add an event listener to this P element? We can do that by doing pl.add event listener, and then this event listener is a function that takes two parameters. The first parameter is the type of event, which is a click event, and then the second parameter is the function you want to handle that event. So I will just call this function whatever I want. So in this case, I'm going to call it handle click, and then here I'm going to then write function handle click. So we looked at how to declare a function the last class, I think. And so in this case, first of all, let's see what happens when we click. Just to note, we can also pass the E, which stands for the event here, and then we can console log e.type, which then tells you what type of event it is, to the console log. Let me just go and take away these other console logs here so it's not confusing. So now when we click that, you can see that it logs the type of event, which is the click event. So that works. So now how do we then change the color when we click this element here? We change the color by saying the P element dot style dot color equals to red. So when I click that again, the color has changed to red. If we wanted it to be the background color instead, we can do this by saying background color equals to red, and so when I click that, the background color is going to be red. If we wanted the background color to be red and then the text to be white, we can say pel.style.color equals to white. White. And so when we do that, we can click and you can see that changed as well. Mind you, you can use hex to write the colors here. So remember I said that hex looks like this. If you use like a color picker, you can go online and just like search color picker and you should have something like this. Select any color you want, and this is what we know as hexadecimal color for the color picker as well. So if I just select that, you have to put a hash, and then I have hash there, and then I paste it. And then let's say we want a different color for we wanted white before or gray, doesn't really matter. We can just select it here and then put it inside of here as well. So we did hash and then put it in here, and then we'll click. You can see that has changed to something else. So that's one event to look at. Which other events? This is the example we just showcased here. So we have other events. So we have the click, which we just showed. There's a mouse enter and then mouse leave, mouse over and then mouse out, which are similar. The only difference is if in the mouse over and mouse out, if you have multiple elements inside that div and then you go over the other child elements inside the parent element, when you're using mouse enter and mouse leave, the function will not trigger. But then when you use mouse over or mouse out, it doesn't matter. If you hover over the children, the function is still going to trigger. So let's do an example here where we say that the event here is for mouse over. When we go over it, you can see it has changed. Mouse out, which is over out. Let's run that again. I think this was mouse over is over, mouse out. I think we were doing mouse, so over, now out, it has a color, and then obviously if we come back in, it's still going to be because out is what is meant to have it there. You can see that this keeps on firing up and printing our type when we're out of this div that is here. So inside and out, it keeps on showing the same thing. And if we do that for mouse enter, come back in, let's do the same thing. And then mouse leave, which we have there. So leave, enter, leave, enter, leave. That's what you get. And now for the keyboard inputs, the submit event only works for if you're using a form. So now instead of that, we're going to look at, since we don't have a form in our HTML now, we're going to look at other ones like key down, key up, focus, blur, cut, and paste. So this will require us to have input fields. So if we come in here and then let's just like quickly put in a form. So if we do a form, and then in that form we have an input, and this input type is of type text, and that input has an ID of input value, and then it also has another ID of submit, which we want here, submit, and then we can give this form an ID of submit or an ID of form. And so this is the form that we have here. Pretty straightforward form. And so let's first then, since we have that, we can then select it using our query selector, and we say at the top here we can say impute form equals to document dot query selector for one thing, and then we want to select the ID, the form ID, which we have here. And also, which other things we put? We had the impute, let's just put this as impute submit instead of impute value for the two ones, so we can also select them as well, where we have impute val for the ID, impute value. So I'm just selecting everything really, and then we can also do that for the button as well, where we have submit, or we can just say button, and then it has impute submit. Okay, so we've selected these three forms here. So let's add an event listener to our impute form, and that type of event listener is a type of submit, since we've just created that now. So if we wanted to do form, I don't know, what do we call this? We called it impute form. So impute form dot add event listener, we use the submit event listener, and then the function that we want to call it is handle submit. Handle submit. And for this, we then write the function here and say function handle submit. And then first of all, we can just say that we just want to console log the type here. Remember, we can pass in the event e. And name that what you want. Doesn't have to be e. You can fully write event.type just to see what type is coming through. And so if we come here, then, and then we put in submit, you can see that that has now shown us this submit type. So the reason why I did all of that was because whenever we submit a form, the default behavior is for it to reload the whole page. So in order to prevent that default behavior, we can just come here and say e.prevent default behavior, prevent default. So if we do that again, we can then do submit here, and you can see that we have that submit just printing out in our console, since we've used prevent default and it's not reloading our page. But when you need to do that, if you don't want it to reload, you just want it to do the logic without having to reload everything, then you can just prevent the default here and do what you need to do. So now that we know that this handle submit event button works, what else can we do? We can say that when whatever text is written inside here and we press the submit button, we can say that we want the p element, this p element, so this one that's here, to have the same text as impute box. So how do we do this? We do this by, let's just take away that as well. We do this by saying, okay, when you submit the form, we want the p element, pl.inner.html, to be equals to, so let's see, we have the impute val, which is that. We want that to be equals to the input val dot value. So let's see. When I write whatever I want here and I press submit, you can see that that has changed to the value that I had here. If I write in my name there and I say submit as well, that's changed to what is there. So since this is a form, we can see that we can use the submit. So if we didn't have a form and we just had an input and the button, we can then add the event listener to the button instead. So we can add the button here, and instead of submit here, we have click. So this will respond to a click event. So if I change that to learning, for example, and I submit, you can see that that has changed to learning because I clicked that button there and it has changed to learning. And so this is just when you have a form, you can use submit, but if you don't have a form, you have to use the click event listener. So which other ones did we have? We had key down, key up. So let's look at that. For key down and key up, we are looking at the input form itself. So this is where we're going to go and say input val the add listener key up, and then handle submit. So what happens here is that when I finish typing, all the things I'm going to have here is going to be changed here. So let's do that. So you can see that as I'm typing, it's showing inside that text here. What about key down? So while the key is still down, what's happening? Let me just reload this. This seems to be, let's see, key down, and I just did key up as well. This has taken everything that is there, but then it somehow, I think maybe because we have this. So I took out the e.prevent default because it was preventing us from writing on key down, but this will work the same way if I continuously keep on having my keys down while I'm typing. And so the next one is focus and blur. So for focus, so if I put this in there and I go inside of here, so while that is in focus, the function is going to be triggered. So let's just console log something. .log I have been triggered. So in this case, when we come in here and be focused, you can see that I've been triggered is in the console. When we go into blur, that's when we come out of that input. So this is in focus, this is blurred, so that's why we have what we have here, which is still the function I am triggered. And then we also have cut and paste. So when we cut a value, so if I said this and then I did cut, you can see that that has changed because I did Control X on my keyboard. And then if I paste, which is Control V on my keyboard, I can see that I have the same thing as well. So these are just one in so many events that we can use with our keys and our mouse. And so now let's look at other things that we can do. So I think the next thing other than that is looking at event bubbling and event delegation, which kind of helps us understand where we should put our events when we're trying to do a particular thing on our website. So going back to the code, right, so talking about event delegation and event bubbling, let's first look at our HTML file. Let's take this form out since we're done with it now. And so if you look at the structure of this page, or I think I've got something else here, I just commented it out for the purpose of this class. Let's come back here and look at how that looks. So now we've got this card that has this input from inside of it, and then a list of things that I'm currently doing. And we've got the parent element, which is card, and then a child, which is card container, and then we've got another child, which is input, and this input, which are siblings. So these are all siblings, these are all children of both card container and card. And so with event bubbling, what happens is that if we put an event listener on task list, and let's say we have an event listener on both card container and card, if we trigger our event on this element here, the event listeners on the parent are also going to be triggered. So let's see an example of what I'm talking about. So if we go into the script element here, and then we then select those elements we just talked about. So if I say const card, I'm going to say document.get element by ID, and then we want to, is it by ID or it's by class, sorry. So in this case, let's just use a query selector instead. So if I say query selector, and then in this I then have card, so I've selected card, and so if I want to do that for the card container, I can say card container, and then I say query selector. So this is a card, it needs that dot there, card container, card container, and then the last one, sorry, where have I gone? And then the last one here is our task list, which is this class that is here, and then we can select that as well. So if I just come on here and I paste and I say task.task list, and then I call this task list as well, or just like task. And since I've got all of these, items of null, so let's see what I have done wrong here. So in my document dot card container, let's see, card container as well as card. So if we look at the other ones that are on the top here, now we've got the same thing here, query selector, card container, task list. I think that is probably triggering because I've removed something previously. So let's just get rid of everything at the top here. So now that we're trying to look at event bubbling and event delegation, so now that we've selected all of this, let's then add our event listener to task.add event listener, which is the child of both card container and card. And then remember, this takes 2 parameters, and I can then, instead of passing in my function, I can do it like this, and inside of here I can just say console.log and then say this is the task list, and then I can do that again for the card container, card container, and just say here this is the card container. I can do it again and say just card itself, which is the actual parent. I say this is the card. So if you remember before, we had the function in a variable and then we passed that variable here. So this is just another way of passing the function inside this add event listener if we do not want it to assign it to another variable that we can call here. So now that we have it set up this way, event bubbling says that if we have an event in the children and we click on that event or we trigger that event, the event is going to bubble up. That's going to go up the tree to the other parent element and also call their own event as well. So this was a task list, this is what the task list is. So if I click on this, it's going to call the event listener for this and this, which we probably don't want because we might not want to trigger the events that we've written for these two. So if I click on that, you can see that the card element, this is the card was triggered, this is the card container was triggered, and this is the task list was then triggered, which we don't actually want. And I think this is, or in some cases this might work fine, but in some other cases we just want to be able to delegate or assign a single element to be able to do a particular thing. So for example, if we wanted to do something with this delete element here, instead of having to click one thing and then 3 other things are being triggered, we can just target that element there and do whatever we want. So first of all, since this doesn't really work for our use case, we can say in order to get this delete button here, in order to delete these items with event delegation, we're able to do this. But let's just say instead of using event delegation, we can say that, oh, we can just select a particular element, and then once we select it, we're able to then target the things that are there. But the problem with this is that if we look at this, we can see that these 3 elements have a class of delete button. So therefore, they're not unique enough for us to then determine which one is clicked at a particular time. So using event delegation, if we use query selector to do it at first, it's only going to click the first one, and then it's not going to know about the 2 other ones. But if we use event delegation, then we're able to make this a lot more better. So how can we do this? First of all, we can do this by, since we've selected this parent element here, we can add a listener. So card dot add event listener, which is the click event listener, and then we can say handle click is the name of our function that we want to handle that click event, and here we can say function handle click, and then when we open and close this, we can then say remember, we can use the e event if it's useful. We can then say if e.target class name, if e.target class name is equal to the class name dot delete button, or delete button here, delete button, we didn't put that in a condition. So if e.target class name is equal to delete button, then console log something. So we can console log and we say, hi, I am better with event delegation. And so we can then click, and you can say, hi, I'm better with event delegation. Click here, same thing, click here, same thing. So great, we've been able to target these buttons to do things. Now, our aim was to then delete these items in our list. And so how do we delete items from the list? We can do this using delete. We can do this by using e.target parent node dot remove. So we're using parent node because what we want to do is remove the parent element of where this is located. So in this case, we have, this is A and li is the parent of A, so we want to remove the parent of this A here. So if we then go here and do that, you can see that it's removed. We go that again, you can see that that's removed. That again, you can see that everything is then removed. If we reload our page, because we didn't save this anywhere, it's going to come back. If we didn't put the parent node and we just put remove on target, what this is going to do is just remove that tag there, which is what we don't want. Instead, we want to remove the whole li element. This is why we had the parent thing here. So delete, delete, and delete. So great. I think this is what event bubbling and event delegation with is, and so hopefully you are able to understand that. So moving on to the assignment, the aim was to get people to create a static page of 3 elements, so of 3 sections, sorry. And so the first section would just be an introduction of yourself. It can have an image of yourself. You can style it however you want. The second section is also going to have what you would like to continue learning, or it could be interest of yourself, etc. Whatever you want to put in the second section, you can put it as well. And then the third section is like a mini project where you can do things with the JavaScript knowledge that you now know. So I have some examples of the mini project that you might want to look into. So here we have a click button. So when you click that button, either the background of your third section color would change, or if you want to change the color of your whole page by just clicking a button, you can do that as well. Random quote generator, you have a button that when you click this, using an array of strings, you can decide that when you click that button, that array of strings is going to randomly choose one of them, and then it's going to display it inside a p element if you want. I can always help you out if you have any questions about this. Another one is just having an input box where whatever message you write inside here is going to show in p element here. Or a counter project where you have a counter, and once you click the lower count, is going to reduce the number, add count is going to increase the number. Or a calculator, or a to-do list like we just kind of looked at for adding an element and removing an element. So these are just the projects that you want to do, and like I said, if you have any questions, you can always message and ask me about them. I'm happy to help. Thank you very much, and hope you have fun doing your project.